This baby hits 88 miles per hour. You're gonna see some serious shit. My calculations. This baby hits 88.
We're Slikrok Productions, and we've been getting a lot of questions online, and we think we're well overdue to have a video about steering problems, about steering rack problems, about ease of steer. There's a lot of stuff going on out there, and although this doesn't just apply to portal cars, it applies to all vehicles altogether. Everything gets accented when you put portals on. When you have more rolling mass, you have a lot more weight. It's a lot harder on your steering components. So we've been doing this for a long time, and we've gone through all the same things, but we've learned quite a few tricks that make this a lot better. And we're going to share a bunch of those things with you. But the first thing I want to talk about is tire choice and wheel choice. So if you're running a heavy offset wheel, the farther you get away from your hub, the more mass you have outside of that hub, the harder it's going to be on your steering components, the harder it's going to be to steer in general, and the harder it is on your rack and pinion. So tire choice is really important. Wheel choice is really important. We run a lot of 6.1 wheels and we run 5.2 wheels. We don't run any 4.3s. We don't get that wide. Our cars are pretty big anyway. We don't need to get any wider. But like I said, the farther you get away from the hub, the worse this gets. So wheel choice is super important. And then when it comes to tires, what compound you're running, what size you're running, whether it's a round top, whether it's a flat top, all these things come into play. So if you build a portal car and you do a 4.3 wheel, you get a flat top tire with a soft rubber compound, you're going to break steering racks. You're going to have tire end problems. You're going to get a lot of feedback through the wheel. You're going to get a lot of bump steer. It is absolutely unavoidable. A lot of guys out there are talking about hydraulic steering. We've gone down this road a bit. It's expensive. There is some options out there, but it isn't completely necessary if you're not going over a 35-inch tire. This car is on 40s. This thing has 2,000 miles on it. It has a stock rack in it. We've yet to replace it. But we've been pretty particular with the setup that we've put on this car, and we'll show you why we haven't replaced the rack on that. But to go back to tires for a minute, the round top tire is a lot easier to steer. When you look at the surface on the ground, when you have a flat top tire in it, it makes a lot more contact, especially if you got an asphalt or you're on slick rock. It creates a lot more resistance on your steering. So when you go with a round top tire, you have less contact on the ground. If you're out in the rocks and you're out rock crawling and you air down, you still have really good contact. But if you air back up, the rest of the time it's a lot easier on your vehicle. Also, width is really important. If you go with a truck tire, you know, a 1250 wide or even more, it's just more surface on there. It's a lot harder on your components. So I can't stress that enough. That's one of the most important parts of this poor situation that we're all going through. But the proper wheel and tire choice is extremely important. Now let's talk about steering racks. So we have replaced a lot of rack and pinions, a lot of steering racks over the years. We run rack bosses when we go away from the factory ones. They're stronger than stock. They have a really good warranty, and this is a really good rack. One of the tricks that we found out a long time ago, though, a lot of times when you're getting play and you think that you have a steering rack going out, instead of the rack actually going out, the bolts are wallowing out the holes where it mounts to your frame, to the plate. And the bolts that come in these are a 10 millimeter bolt. They're relatively small, and we drill them out and we replace them with a 3/8 bolt. So the reason we do that is if you get a lot more bite on it, you can put a really good lock nut on there. But you can drill out the steering rack, just run a 3/8 bit through it, run a 3/8 bit through the two smaller ones, replace them with a 3/8 bolt. The rack will stay in place when that happens. When the rack starts moving and it starts getting pressure on it, those bolts work their way loose. The rack will actually start pivoting back and forth. It gets a lot of slop in it. It starts egging out the holes in your car, and then you have a problem. So we figured out quite a while ago, when we buy a new car, one of the first things we do is we pull the rack out, we drill it out, and we put bigger bolts in it so it holds it in place. If the rack stays secure, your steering will stay tighter. The next thing we'll go over is tie rod ends. Factory tie rod ends are garbage. If you're going to run a 30-inch tire and below, that's one thing. But if you're going to get into big tires, especially Polaris tire rod ends, they are not going to hold up. The newer ones that've got the curve in them, they all fail. We've all seen it happen. No matter what, tire rod ends are a really good upgrade to have for a safety issue. You do not want to break a tire rod end while you're going down the road. But the factory ones that have some flex in them, the Rangers are really bad with the flex on top of that. They're just, the steel in them will actually move. So if you're binding up and it's actually bending on them, it creates some problems with them. So get a good set of aftermarket tire rod ends. There's a lot of great companies out there. There's a lot of great options out there. We run 4 or 5 different sets of tire rod ends that we're partial to, but a good set of aftermarket tire rod ends helps your steering feed a whole bunch. So for all the Can-Am guys out there, this is the vehicle we've probably had the most steering problems with, and it's kind of there's a few different things that come into play when you're trying to fix the steering in one of these. Number one, the original XRSs, anything with 3-wheel drive that came out earlier, they have a low amp power steering unit in it. They're not great units, and the steering rack is not a great design on top of that. So the racks are a bit on the weak side. They pivot really easy on them, and these cars are extremely underpowered when it comes to amperage. The RC car that had a selectable front end in it, that had a bigger amperage power steering unit, so they're quite a bit easier than the original XRSs are. And all the 19s that come out with their locker in them, those are higher amperage as well. But if you've got one of the original XRSs, you probably want to look into upgrading the power steering motor a bit just to get a little bit more out of it. As far as the feedback goes, these are double sheared cars. They're a really good setup as far as, you know, from the tire rod end out, but you have to put gusset kits in these cars. Where the A-arms are on them, literally this car twice has gotten to the point where it started egging out. Before I put a reinforcement kit on this, it was egging the holes out because the A-arms are actually moving. There's a lot of leverage on the 72 cars, and so the steering being weak in them, they get a lot of feedback. You hit anything, it puts a lot of pressure on the A-arms. So a reinforcement kit for these to double share everything is extremely important. But the Can-Ams are definitely harder on steering than the Razors are. We've had better luck fixing the Razor problems than we have the Can-Am problems. And there's not a lot of options out there for steering racks. There's not a lot of affordable options out there for steering racks. There is some options out there, but they're expensive. But really, the wheel and tire choice on these is extremely important. The 6-1 wheel and a round top tire is extremely important on this car. The double shear kit is really important. It really, if you own one of these and you haven't got a reinforcement plate in it, look up a good company and get one. They're not that expensive, and it's worth their weight in gold in these cars, and it will help your steering because it keeps everything in line. So last but not least, we've been messing around with some repositioning the tie rod locations on these. And the reason we've done that is in the factory location, when you have big tires, if you collide with something in the front or you're coming downhill, you hit a rock and it'll rip the steering wheel right out of your hand, but it'll oversteer the car. And what we've learned with this is if you can slide the tie rod end back about 3/8 of an inch, you lose a little bit of steering throw in it, so it affects how sharp you can turn, but it makes it so you can't oversteer it. So it's a lot more reliable. You can't break CV axles, you can't oversteer, and it's a lot easier on your rack and pinion. But that is the trade-off with it currently, is you move it back about 3/8 of an inch, you don't do any more damage because you're getting farther away from the center point of the wheel, your steering becomes easier, so that's a nice bonus that comes with it, but you do lose a few degrees in steering throw. So we've done this with pretty much all of our cars for the last 1.5 years or so. We haven't had any problems with it. The steering is really easy. It doesn't take the racks out. So that fixes a lot of the problems, but it comes down to the steering throw. And I know that a lot of you guys already know this. We've designed a new bracket. It is hopefully in production right now. We're really close to getting that out, and that will put more leverage on the backside, and it'll fix the steering throw problem. But there's a little bit of R&D being done with this because there is a liability with it. When you start messing with this kind of stuff, it has to be perfect. We have to know it's right before it can come out. But you guys will be the very first ones to know as soon as it comes out, and we'll make sure on Portal Nation we put a sick deal on there for you guys. Thanks for watching.